Let me invite you to be part of an RFQ process. Okay? Some of you have enjoyed this game before, even with me. So probably you'll see that. And probably you have played this game before. So the thing is that if you had to choose a spaceship, and you are in an RFQ process, how would you select it? Probably getting information, right? So the first thing is how to compare one with the other. Well, both of them were designed in the 60s, a bit old, so that does not make any difference in this context. The one on the left can travel 8 times faster than light speed, while the one on the right is fairly slow in comparison. It's about 77 millionths of light speed, right? The one on the left is fairly large. Actually, it's much larger than a football pitch, right? And the other is super small. I mean, the 3 people can fit inside in very uncomfortable conditions. The public was interested for decades in the one on the left, and still very interested. While the other was interesting for about 8 to 10 days at most, and from time to time, someone tells you that it was interesting for someone. You can wear really comfortable clothes, very cool, by the way. And the other is awful. They are the bare minimum to keep you alive. The question is that the one on the left never flew for real, but the other can bring you to the moon and return safely. And only that small piece of information is what makes the difference for the RFQ. So you understand now our world, right? Why we ask so many questions. But still, I mean, depends on your expectations, you know. Because, I mean, if you want to be in TV and wear nice pajamas, you should choose the one on the left. Don't get me wrong. But if you want to go to the moon for real and suffer all that, then you need to go to the Apollo. Okay? So, reality is ugly. That is the point. Okay? And reality sometimes requires that you see the full picture. Otherwise, you think you really understand it where you are not getting the point. Okay? And in this industry, we get very nice quotes about what is this about. And the virtualization, now we are not hearing that any longer, or not too much in this conference, fortunately. That this is about separating the software from the hardware and all the like. And you know that just following a set of standards is sufficient to get it done eventually. It's way more complicated than that. And I'm glad that we had some questions about that, because it's a process that requires being involved, actively involved, to make it happen. So that picture is not wrong, but it's incomplete, and that makes it wrong. Okay? Oh, sorry, I was too fast. Okay, the reality is that you need to deal with a large set of technologies, and you need to deal with variety of technologies and variety of suppliers. And no one said that that was a bad thing. We were looking for that from the very beginning of this journey. And now we are complaining about diversity, options. What a headache is that? No, the reality is ugly and requires some investment to understand it. And even in the cases where you see some homogeneity, and this is an example of a distributed infrastructure that applies for real, you have even different optimizations that are contradictory, even for the same technology in the case of OpenStack. So you want to optimize for density or for I/O performance. You want to optimize for latency or for throughput. And all that requires to be taken into account. Otherwise, you won't be able to make it. And even the world is not either private cloud or public cloud. It's a combination of both. And it's a combination even of other technologies that are not necessarily open, but are relevant in the business, right? So the challenge to orchestrate all that is precisely to embrace that complexity and understand it and make something that is super complicated extremely useful to consume. And that is the actual challenge, and this is the last line in this picture. Because even if I double-click in one of those infrastructures, the set of components that I can potentially choose is huge. So I don't want to be in charge of that catalog anymore. I'm precisely trying to make my life easier, not more complicated. Okay? And that requires also a change of the mindset of my management. I mean, iterational management is bridging the gap between these systems, the BSS and the OSS. I'm oversimplifying a lot, okay? But you are clever people and already know the rest, right? So I'm oversimplifying, right? So you have the BSS and the OSS, and at the bottom, you have a physical network functions. That was the old wall that is already exists. And there is a gap. So what we did in that situation, we bridge that gap with an EMS and with some logic that stitches the components. So if I have a new PNF, I need another connection. If I have another PNF, I need another connection, and so on. The dynamic of that process is not good, because if you have the explosion of components that you have in an NFV environment, you get something like this. You have a set of technologies that, as I showed, I have a new BNF, I need to bridge the gap. I need to bridge the gap with a combination of technologies, with every single combination of technologies, new BNF, new type of connector, and even if I deploy the same BNF but in a different infrastructure, you know what? I need to do it again, and again, again. Okay? And you can multiply that with all the components that I showed in the previous slides. So you can see how busy would be the picture. That's why I'm saying that I'm oversimplifying. You will allow me. So there is a gap. And the point is that the challenge for the NFV orchestration, and particularly for the end-to-end service orchestration that needs to bridge that gap, is precisely to do it efficiently, to making your life easier and not more complicated. So the NFV orchestration is supposed to give you an ability to interact with different types of infrastructure without bothering about the subtleties between them, and being able to load generic descriptors to do that, and even create a logic on top of that. So whenever I deploy one BNF, I already have all the information that I need, so I can deploy it either here or there. Okay? Okay, that is the challenge. This is the last line. The last ugly thing is that, okay, this is the theory, but in practice, if you go to an orchestration, and we are hearing some frustration in the previous questions, in the previous presentation, right? That, yeah, but this is not working as I expected, right? Because the kind of effects that you can find is that this is not zero touch at all. Because the theory says that you do this, the reality says that you get this. All in red are touches. So it's the exact opposite of zero touch. Because all those steps are not considered in the automation, so you need to do it afterwards and figure out. Okay. So we share the same pain. Okay, so now I'm telling you, so how we see this in Telefónica, how to address this. We see that, there's a way to bridge that specific gap that is what is missing in that picture. And it's OSM. In the case of OSM, it's a community that is fairly large. I mean, this is not about having 98 or 150. It's about making sure that everyone can be included. From those BNF vendors that had any issue to onboard the BNF, they can feel included to provide the feedback so that it can work in an environment. For those infrastructure providers that feel that there are some subtleties that need to be dealt in a specific manner, not talking about the case of public cloud, and by the way, we are glad to see Amazon there. All that is the complexity that they can help you to embed in the system so you don't need to take care anymore. Okay? And that is what is the actual value. It's a way of driving that consensus that was sustained before. What is hard is not either producing a standard or producing code. It's reaching agreements in an efficient fashion. So in the case of OSM, behaves exactly as I described. Is that you trigger something by a well-known normal interface, you put the packages, it triggers some processes in the beam, and you can coordinate it. Double clicking on that, I mean, the first is that what you have is a set of connectors provided by each of the infrastructure providers, so you don't need to take care of that anymore. And the way to manage each of the BNFs is embedded in the own descriptor, so it's the CHAN framework, so you don't need to bother about that anymore from the operation perspective. Double clicking, I mean, you have the BNF package, which includes everything that you might need, would possibly need from that perspective, the resource description and the management procedures, which is code to be run, and the same would happen with the network service package. That is something that we need to produce as service provider to tell the components how to need to be stitched and how to manage end-to-end that service, right? But that is part of our work. So essentially what happens is that everything that is related to resources goes to the branch on the right, so you can leverage on all the set of connectors, and hopefully the beam will do the rest, okay? And in the other branch, you manage the actual elements, and you configure them in a manner that is by high-level primitives, that is way more convenient for this picture. And that it gives you a nice bridge also to anything that looks like TM Forum APIs and all the like, up to the stack. This is very natural path, okay? Even if we were not talking anymore about virtual or physical, the right branch would be useless, but still the procedures will remain. This is exactly what we were looking for. Everything on the left still applies, no matter if it's a BNF or a PNF or an hybrid of both. And that creates a lot of simplification, because that simplifies the supply chain, because it makes that the responsibilities have been separated. I mean, the complexity about building the BNF package comes from the BNF vendor, and we need to evaluate that. So the first step is that the tools are there so that the BNF vendor can position themselves in the ecosystem, so they can test in different infrastructures that are relevant for them. And once that they have the package and the images, they can bring it to the next step in the channel, which is essentially the pre-production. So you can test it together with other BNFs and build the network service and evaluate them. And once that you have it, and you feel comfortable with that one in your technology, you can push it to be instantiated in production. And also, once that it's instantiated, instantiation is not the end game, it's the beginning. So all the primitives that are in the network service are embedded, so you can still operate it without the need of changing it continuously. Okay? So that is the concept. Also, something that we have appreciated, because this is not a PowerPoint slide. I mean, this is something that we are seeing real, and we've been tracking very closely, as you can imagine. I mean, something that for us is really important is OSM is attached to reality. And that means that OSM is going to showing up in events where it's put in the most uncomfortable conditions, interoperating with random BNFs, with random infrastructures, and still making them work, right? And there are vendors putting their brand from the code, downstreaming the code that is in OSM, and making their own products, and go to those events, and get a benefit from that, and can improve how the system behaves. Okay, and that is great. By the way, in the last NFV plug test, it was the only open source orchestrator that brought 2 commercial distros, or any commercial distro. And another point that I think is fairly important is that the code base is stable, and there is a commitment to make it sustainable. And that is precisely what is happening over the time. If you analyze the way that that OSM footprint, you can get any other parameter, but this is fairly obvious and unidimensional, how the footprint has been is diminishing at the same time as the set of functionalities has been growing. So that means an active effort to make it better and more solid. Probably it will not tell you much, but I think that sometimes the perspective helps. So, I mean, because probably you say, okay, maybe it's not 2, it's 3 gigs or whatever, but it doesn't matter. I mean, I think it's really important to pay attention to something else than just the absolute numbers. Also, the comparisons are useful, okay, and some other metrics that can be fairly useful to see. So that means that the maturation of the process has been sufficient in this time, and it will keep that. Okay, so in the case of Telefónica, obviously we are quite interested on this approach, right? But what are we doing about it? So first thing first is that OSM, in the case of Telefónica virtualization program that is called UNICA, has become one of the key pieces for the evolution of the next steps of the UNICA program. And it's something, probably you have heard of it in other events, but I'd like to recall it to set the ground. So where we are, actually there's an interest on deploying it as soon as possible, but we started very early in that process. So even from Q1 of the last year, we were already testing BNFs using OSM and evaluating BNFs with OSM. So the certification process that's been mentioned before involved already OSM. We wanted to know if anything was missing, and we wanted to know it upfront with real BNFs, not with some artificial BNF, right? And that's gone rather well. I would not tell you that it was trivial at the beginning, but now we are quite comfortable with that process. So that made us to give another step, is selecting a short list in the middle of the last year, and now aligned with the timing of the release 5 of OSM, we are will be in the process of an RFQ to award an integrator in our footprint that I'll remind it is 21 countries, and well, it's not trivial to become an integrator of Telefónica. Actually, I'd like to be more specific on that because I've heard a lot of questions during these days, so I think this slide will help for those who have asked me. There are two roles here. I mean, is the integrator and the distributor. I mean, the distributor is the one who creates a distro based on upstream. I mean, if you see the case of OpenStack is fairly obvious that, I mean, you can consume OpenStack yourself. But also there is a possibility to have it packaged and maintained professionally, so you can have the also security patches, all the evolution path and all the like, right? And an appropriate installer and everything. And that product can be resold at scale to more than one customer, right? So that is the first phase where we are at, and in the shortlist that I hope that will close very shortly. So we can go to the integration part, that is everything else that is required in order to be integrated in a multinational company like Telefónica, with so many geographies and different components around in each country. Okay, so that's the role of the integrator. That is the RFQ that I'm mentioning before the end of the year. Okay. And that's all that I had. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Francisco. All right, questions from the audience? Back here with Verizon.
Hey, this is Shri from Verizon. The VNF onboarding thing which you had shown did you happen to leverage from the VNF onboarding which they have for a TM4M or own app, any chance? Or is it totally different VNF onboarding?
No, I mean, I'm talking about the kind of onboarding that you will see in a black test. I mean, when you have an infrastructure, a BNF, and you need to make it run and work as they are expected. I mean, it's not an exercise of trying to see what you do right after.
Okay.
So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I mean, just to elaborate a bit, is what we do is that when a BNF we need to evaluate it, we follow the same process that will follow, and the same testing that will follow with a physical element, say an EPC, right? So we simply take the first steps to onboard it, so we can guarantee that it can be in one click deployed in different type of infrastructures that we evaluate, and then we run the test plan as if it were a physical element. Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, Mark Fiuczynski from Akamai.
Can you speak up just a little bit?
Mark Fiuczynski from Akamai. Good. Just a quick question on the day 2 operations that you do via OSM. Is that intended to basically be a layer between what was, in the oversimplified picture of OSS BSS?
Let me go to. I think that you mean this picture.
There was a day 2 operation, and it sounded like that those actions would allow you to kind of be a layer between the traditional OSS BSS and the VNFs. That's the intent?
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly that. I mean, what you have is in the NS descriptor, there's something that is additional to the own scope of Sol5 or anything that allows you to create end-to-end primitives over a set of VNFs that are running. So you don't operate, I mean, you can, but you are not forced to operate individually the VNFs of the network service. So, and that those set of primitives are declared. So you can read it, and even you can load them as a schema that can be used in the context of TM forum primitives if you want. Okay.
I have a second question, but I'll leave it to
You know, we can talk later and we can have another question for him during lunch. How about that? My question is, again, I'm from IBM, so I kind of have a systems integrator perspective. License management, and specifically because VNFs could be owned by startup, a vendor, you could be providing a service to your enterprise customer, you may be consuming yourself, there could be a system integrator in between, right? How does orchestration handle, you are handling the license management? Again, licenses could be of different type, could be throughput, it could be instantiation, could be CPU, you know, all of those combinations. And then how that licensing then works with actual orchestration, whether it is onboarding, provisioning, management, and operations. This is a very real problem as part of my job I'm struggling with, and I would love to have your perspective on that.
Yeah, I fully agree with you that this is a field where it requires some, I would say, some homogeneity in the system. So, unfortunately, I mean, the schemes for licensing and how the BNFs report the number of instances, etc., change from one vendor to another. There is an active thread in NFV in particular, precisely to discuss about how to create some degree of homogenizations about the licensing among different vendors. That, again, can be adopted or not. I mean, it's up to the vendors, but hopefully it's part of our duty to make sure as service providers we set some stringent conditions about that so it does not break all the automation. That said, I mean, there are ways today, and probably would be time for a longer discussion over the coffee. But there are ways to handle that complexity of the variety of schemas to handle the licenses, so it does not become a permanent dilemma. And sometimes you need to onboard as well the license server. Sometimes you need to handle it as an external connection. And that needs to become part of the network service. Unfortunately, you need to make it yet another component of the network service instead of being something that is a service shared by the network. Right? That would be the ideal. But still, there are ways to do interesting things commercially without the need of that uniformity yet. Okay. Yeah, by the way, it's a good idea to have a coffee now, right?